Okay. Are there any questions about anything that I've covered so far in the class? Okay, I'm seeing lots of no's. This is the last lecture. We will not have another lecture because on Tuesday next week is final exams. So we are starting our final exams on Tuesday. We will not have another lecture. Remember that this particular lecture is not on this coming test, test number 6. The material that's on this lecture, because it's our last lecture, will appear on the final exam, but it doesn't have its own test. The test number 6 will cover personality, psychopathology, and psychotherapy. If you have not finished it yet, it is due on the 7th, Monday the 7th, which is the last day of classes, as well as the essay that you have. Your final day to turn in the essays is on the 7th. Okay? So we were on talking about the bystander problem, Kitty Genovese, and this is where I stopped, which is the explanations for the bystander effect. There are 3 different reasons that the bystander effect occurs. So they are, the first one, pluralistic ignorance. That says others people don't look like they're concerned, so why should I be concerned? You're basically conforming to what everybody else is doing. Nobody looks like there's a reason to do anything, so I'm not going to do anything. Then social inhibition. That is the fear of negative evaluation. I may respond to this as if it was an emergency, and everybody else may think it's not an emergency, and then I'll look like a fool. So I've overreacted, and so you're drawing attention to yourself, and some people don't want that attention. That's social inhibition. You think or know that other bystanders can see you. Now, this also, the social inhibition, can be because you think you might get sued by the person you're helping. And that used to be a problem in the past where my friend and I were playing in our yard when I was a kid and a teenager, and 2 doors down from us, a car got hit, a Volkswagen, spun around, and we ran down to make sure that everything was okay, and he went to call 911, and I pulled the door off of the Volkswagen to get the lady out of the car because it was smashed up and she had a cut on her head and she was bleeding. Now, in the old days, if she had not been a very nice person, she may have sued me for pulling the door off of her car, or if she had cut herself, she may have sued me for cutting her as I got her out of the car, and so she had a scar on her leg, you know. But today there are rules, and there are both state and federal laws that stop people from suing you. They cannot sue you. It's called the Good Samaritan laws. So the Good Samaritan law says if you are working on somebody and you are trained to do so, or you're doing something that is obviously needed, then you will not be sued. You cannot be sued. So that is no longer a reason for social inhibition. And then there's the diffusion of responsibility. As we talked about, our obligation or responsibility to help is diffused or divided among all the other bystanders. You think there are other people that can help, and therefore you don't help. And if you do, it takes you longer to help than normal with less bystanders. So each of these conditions requires that we make a judgment about the people around us. That is our social situation, how we see ourselves. And social psychologists also study how people judge other people and what influences those judgments. So to explain the patterns we find in social interactions, we must also look at cognitive processes, our thought processes. In the language of social psychology, we need to understand how we construct our social reality. All the events that are happening around us, we bring them into our brain, we connect them with memories, we perceive our environment. It is a subjective evaluation of our world. So social reality is an individual's subjective interpretation of other people and of the relationships that they have with them. The social reality that we construct determines who we find attractive, which is a big part of social psychology, who we find threatening, who we seek out and who we try to avoid. And judgments we make about those other people depend not only on their behavior, but also on our interpretation of the situation that we find ourselves in. So many experiments have been done to study what influences us and how we make judgments in relationship to attraction. And the reward theory of attraction states that we like best people who give us maximum rewards at a minimum cost. In other words, we're giving people something, but they give us more back than we gave them. Those people become more attractive to us because they give us those extra gifts, whatever they happen to be. It's no surprise that we are attracted to people who give us something. We like those who give us gifts, who agree with us. Agree with us is a reward. We are getting a reward from somebody when they agree with us, even if they're agreeing with something that we say bad about ourselves. And that is something we'll talk about in just a minute, about women who end up with men who devalue them because the woman devalued themselves. And if you devalue yourself and somebody comes along and says, oh, you're not worth very much, are you? Well, thank you. You just agreed with me. That's a reward because you're agreeing with my own view of myself, as horrible as that is. So act friendly toward us, share our interests, entertain us, and help us in times of need. But if they're helping us in times of need and we feel like the only reason they're helping us is to get something back, the only reason they're helping us is to get something from us, we don't like that kind of behavior. Now, we don't mind giving something back. That's a social exchange. We get something, we give something. That's sharers, people who share. But we shrink from relationships that merely take from us and offer nothing in return. And we can define 3 different types of people. The people who give and never take, the people who take and never give, and the main group of us who share. We give and take. Most of us are givers and takers, both sharers. The takers, we really don't like people who are just take, and never give back. The givers we love, and I use my grandmother as an example of this. She was very old. She had a walker. It was the only way she could walk around, and I would come into the house to see her, and she'd be like, Roger, oh, I wish I had known that you were coming. I would make you a cake. Let me get up and I'll make you a cake. And she's trying to get herself up out of the chair and go to the kitchen to make me a cake. I'm like, Grandma, no, don't do the meom. I called her meom because my mother said, this is my mom, as opposed to my dad's mom, right? My mom, and I interpret that as a kid as meom. And since I was the first child born, the first grandchild born, every other cousin called her meom as well. That was her name, meom. So, Miam, sit down, let me do something for you. You know, I came over just to say hi, but if there's any laundry you need or kitchen dishes that need to be done or I can vacuum the floors, she's like, no, let me get you something. She's always a giver, never a taker. She would not take. At family get-togethers, when she cooked for everybody, and her seat along a huge table, we'd have 50 people at this table, and her seat was right next to the kitchen, so she could get up and keep feeding everybody. And she made sure everybody was eating before she ever sat down to eat. A giver, very strong giver. And she had cancer. And there is a correlation between givers and cancer because they never relax. They're always up and they're always trying to help other people, and they never let anyone else help them. If you find yourself to be a giver, sit down. Learn to let other people do some things for you. Be a sharer. And of course, we don't like takers. So when we study in most relationships in attraction, most relationships can be seen as an exchange of benefits, and the benefits can be some combination of money, cars, clothes, other material possessions, or the exchange might involve something intangible like praise or status or information or emotional support. And in brief, reward theory says we like best those who give us maximum rewards at minimum cost. So social psychologists have found 4 pretty powerful sources of reward that predict interpersonal attraction. And they are proximity, similarity, self-disclosure, and physical attractiveness. So proximity is how close are you to another person? The boy next door, the girl next door, the guy in the office next to yours at work, the person in the house next to you. How many of you know your neighbors' names and know something about your neighbor, the one that's right next to you, but you don't know the person 2 more doors down? We tend to be connected to the people that are really close, right? Proximity. So studies show that frequent contact best predicts our closest relationships. In college dormitories, the residents are more often become close to friends with the person who lives in the next room to them rather than 2 doors down from them. And this principle of proximity or nearness also accounts for the fact that many people end up married to the boy next door or the girl next door. Now, my father was Navy, so we traveled all over the place. I was never in one place for more than 3 years, and a lot of my students are Coast Guard families, and because this is a big Coast Guard area right here, and so it's possible that you also have been traveling around. But for those of you who have been born and raised in Weeksville, pick on Weeksville, born and raised there, you know the girl next door and the boy next door, and you have been born in that house. You'll be raised in that house. You'll probably inherit that house, so you are most likely to marry somebody that is in your neighborhood, if not the boy next door or the girl next door. And it correctly predicts that people at work will make more friends among those with whom they are most contact. The mail person, a person who puts the mail out in everybody's offices, they have the most friends in the entire place because they have the most contact with everybody in the place. And of course, the person in the office next to you is more likely to be your friend than the person 2 doors down. Then similarity, people usually find it more rewarding to strike up friendships with someone who shares their attitudes. They're similar in attitudes, similar in interests, similar in values, and experiences than to have their thinking challenged by people who are disagreeable or just simply different than you are. The similarity principle also explains why teenagers are more likely to make friends among those who share their political and religious views and educational aspirations or attitudes toward alcohol and drugs. I remember being in high school, and my group of friends I had 2 groups of friends. One group of friends were the ones that were going on to college, university, and another group of friends was the friends that were in vocations, because I liked both. I was going on, I planned to be a veterinarian, but I took shop, I took welding, I took the electronics courses. I loved that stuff. I like working with my hands. And so I actually belonged to 2 different groups, and I was the connection between those 2 groups. And when you take Psych 241, lifespan development, we talk about groups and how groups form and the connections that are made between those groups. Now, both of these groups knew people who were also the druggies, who were smoking, under the bleachers down by the football field or behind the cafeteria, and we knew about them, but I didn't hang out with them. And every once in a while, maybe there was one person in one of my groups that was also a member of that group too. So likewise, similarity accounts for the fact that most people find marriage partners of the same age, race, social status, and attitudes and values. Now, self-disclosure is an interesting one because we're telling people about ourselves and we're trusting that they're not going to hurt us. So self-disclosure, good friends and lovers share intimate details about themselves that could be used against them. This practice not only allows people to know each other more deeply, but it sends a signal of trust to the other person. It's as if I say, here is a piece of information that I want you to know about me, and I trust you not to hurt me with it. Friends and lovers usually find such exchanges highly rewarding, and when you observe people exchanging these kinds of confidences and details about their lives, you can predict that they are becoming more and more attracted to each other. I had 2 Russian students once. They sat in the front of the class by the door, and the male and female student, and the male student didn't speak English very well, but the female student did, and so as I was talking, she would translate from English to Russian for him. And they always stayed after and they talked. and they were good students. And one day she brought in, now they both had different last names. They did not wear any ring. They were just two Russian students that found each other at the school, as far as I knew. One day she brings in a big gulp. You know what a big gulp is? A big drink in a plastic container. And I think it's from 7-Eleven, if I remember correctly. Big gulp is from 7-Eleven. Is that right? Anybody recognize that? So yes, okay. So she brought in this big gulp, and she's drinking from the straw in the big gulp. She puts it down. She picks it back up, drinks from the straw, puts it back down. He picks it up and drinks and puts it down. And I'm watching this, and then she picks it up, and then he picks it up, and she picks it up, and he picks it up. They're drinking from the same drink. After class that day, everybody else has left, and I say to them, "Are you two married?" And all the blood went out of their faces. I mean, they turned white. They did not want people to know that they're married. And I said, well, then you need to stop sharing spit because that's what you're doing. You're saying to the other person that I recognize that you could be kissing other people and getting other germs, and you're not doing that. I accept you sharing spit with me because you're not going to have any germs except my germs. And so they never did that again. But that is a self-disclosure, really. You're allowing another person to drink from your drink. That's a self-disclosure. Physical attractiveness is about beauty, but in the United States, we do have a saying that beauty is in the eye of the beholder. What I find to be attractive may not be what you find to be attractive, but we do find things to be attractive. And interestingly enough, as I pointed out in the very first video that I gave you guys called First Impressions, that first impression only takes a few seconds to make, and we only have what is apparent to us to make that first impression. The clothes they're wearing, the way their hair is, the way they look, their beauty or not beauty, whatever it is that we see. But as soon as we start to know them, that idea that we have of what their beauty level is can increase or decrease based on them, their walk, their talk, the way they hold themselves, the way they express themselves. They can go downhill or uphill. So it isn't just, beauty is not just skin deep. We see beauty as a whole. Unfortunately, the very first thing we see is the way that person looks. So people usually find it more rewarding to associate with those they consider physically attractive. Potential employers, it's ridiculous, but potential employers prefer good-looking job candidates to plainer candidates. If you take two people, one plain-looking, one beautiful-looking, or handsome and just plain, and you give them the same resume, and they're both actors, so they can both put on that interview process, the majority of people that are hired are the ones that are handsome or pretty, not the plain-looking ones. As if that made a difference to how good they're going to be at their job, right? Attractive children are judged as happier and more competent than their peers. Attractive children more competent. How is attraction and the way a person looks and their ability to do particular things have anything to do with each other? And across many studies involving a variety of characteristics, including you're telling these people, this is the person's intelligence level, their sincerity, their masculinity or femininity, their independence, and here's a picture of them, their physical attractiveness. The physical attractiveness overwhelms everything else as the best predictor for how well a person would be liked after the first meeting. Do you think you like this person? Here's all the information about them, and here's the picture. And it's the picture that makes the people think, I would like that person. Worse than that. You could take all of the people, the politicians who are running for office here on the East Coast, take their pictures over to the West Coast, giving the pictures to people on the West Coast saying, these are some politicians that are running on the East Coast. Who do you think is going to win? And the majority of the time, they're going to pick the person who won because we tend to pick based on their attractive level, not based on how good they're going to be as a senator, as a congressman, as president, as the leader of the city or the county. We look at are they pretty? Are they handsome? So first impressions are made from the first view of an individual, but it can change depending on the person's self-esteem, which is what you see next. After you see the person, you see their self-esteem, how they hold themselves. Are they looking down all the time? They don't look you in the face. They don't look you in the eyes. Right? Now that's a problem because Asians are taught not to look you in the eyes. So you might think that that person has a self-esteem problem, but it's not. That's just the way they've been trained to live. So that can change things too. Now I'm going to use all four of these. I'm going to talk about how I met my wife because it fits here really well. I already had my master's degree in psychology, and I was going back for a degree in computers at College of the Albemarle, and my wife was a student at College of the Albemarle also in computers. Similarity, that was the first thing, similarity. I was programming a program for the head of the tutorial department, tutors, to keep track of all the tutors and when they worked and where they were working and who they were working with. And she was one of the tutors. And she walked into the room while I was programming. And she walked up behind me. And the very first words this woman ever said to me was, "That won't work." Like, what? Who's there? What is this? Who are you? And she went to the blackboard and she drew out the logic and she showed me where my logic was backwards, and she was right. We had a great conversation about computers, and she was in the computer field and I was getting into the computer field, and we were taking similar classes, and I don't remember the conversation much at all. But she said I was somewhat good looking, physical attractiveness. I was somewhat good looking. I was funny. I was intelligent, and I made her laugh, right? Funny. And a lot of my other female students who are married say also, she did not say this, but I think she might have been thinking it anyway, I could take instructions real well, which is good for a husband. And she decided that day at that meeting, she was going to marry me. That day, she decided she was going to marry me. Now I was not at that point interested in marriage. I was 12 years older than she was, and my parents had been married for 21 years and got divorced. So I did not see marriage as a really good option. People live for a long time together and then they get divorced. That's just not, so I didn't think I'd ever find anybody that I would want to live with for the rest of my life. And she decided she was going to marry me. And she, since we're both in computers, she knew what classes I had to take, and she made sure what classes I was taking. And if she could take that class, she got into that class. She was in my class for COBOL programming, and she was in my class for Pascal as well. And one day she said, "I was in your Pascal class." And I said, "You were? I don't remember you being in my Pascal class." She said, "Yep, I sat right behind you, and you stared at the redhead in the first row all day long." Like, yeah, I remember the redhead. But so she was in my classes with me. And if she couldn't get into the class, she made sure she was outside the classroom and was there when the class emptied so that she would be following me around. All of my friends, my male friends, were calling her my shadow. And it was just right over my head. She was just one of the other people that I hung around with as far as I was concerned, but they were calling her my shadow. And so she was in proximity to me. We had similar things. And I was somewhat good looking to her. She's pretty good looking too, as far as I was concerned. So she had the physical attractiveness there as well. But we were dating. I asked her out on a date. Finally, after 6 months of hanging around me, I asked her out on a date. And she says, "We've been dating already." We had already been dating. I said, "What?" She's like, we had lunch together the other day, and I'm like, that's just friends hanging out together. That's not dating. I didn't buy your food for you. I'm buying your food. Do you want to go out? I'll take you to McDonald's, right? We can go out across the street from the school and we can get something to eat and then come back for the next class. Like, she's okay. Right. So that was our first date to me. She thinks we were dating for 6 months before that. But we got to McDonald's. I bought the food. We sat down and I got chicken McNuggets. And I held up one of the chicken McNuggets and I said, I like this place because it's cheap, 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 cheap. And she laughed. And I thought, wow, that's the worst joke I ever got. She laughed at it. That's pretty good. She's kind of interesting. She also knew that I had a psychology degree. And so when she took psychology, she asked me about books and things that she could do her book report on. And I gave her one of my books to do a book report on. So we had a lot of similarities together. We had a lot of proximity together. But we were dating for about 3 months, and I was only kissing her on the cheek because when I went to kiss her, she turned to get so I could give her a cheek kiss. And she would kiss me on the cheek. I was like, what's wrong? Is this not going anywhere? So I asked her, I said, why aren't you kissing me, like kissing me? And she said, you're 12 years older than me, and you've had 6 girlfriends before me. Take an AIDS test. If it's negative, then I'll kiss you on the lips. Smart girl. You have to be careful today. Smart girl. So I went to the doctor and I had an AIDS test. Now in those days, AIDS tests it took 2-3 weeks before you got your AIDS test back. And the doctor says, where are we sending the AIDS test to? What address? And I gave her address. And she got the information before I ever did. Now when she got it, she called me up and she said, you come over because we're going to open it together. And it was negative. If it had been positive, we may not have gotten married, but we still would have been friends. Why? Because I shared with her information that could have caused me some real damage. She could have told people about it, and I was telling her by sending it to her that I trusted her with this information. And we did finally get married. I was not really interested in marriage. We dated for 6 years. And I went to a conference. I was working at Mental Health Center at the time, and I was their chief information officer. And I went to a conference, and a guy offered me twice my salary, 2 times, $120,000 to move to Texas to work for him. And the very first thing I thought was, would Jane come with me? And then I realized, wow, she's that important to me. And when I got back from the conference, I asked her to marry me, and she said yes, and it's been over 25 years now. So all of these things came together. And you can see how it works in your life probably too. But that is the example from my life, how the reward theory of attraction works. You get that? You probably have stories yourselves that you could use, that you could tell, and how these work for you. So the rules of proximity, similarity, self-disclosure, and physical attractiveness, they may explain a lot about interpersonal attraction, but when you look around, sometimes you see connections between people, relationships that are not very rewarding. Right? The 5 who's going out with a 10, the woman who's out with a man who abuses her. Why is it that we see these particular types of relationships? Well, we've seen that reward theory predicts our attraction to smart, nearby, self-disclosing, and light-minded, powerful, and even good-looking people. And you've probably observed that most people end up with friends and mates who you would judge as about the same level of attractiveness, the so-called matching hypothesis. I've already talked about this in other lectures. The matching hypothesis predicts that most people will find friends and mates that are of about their same level of attractiveness. But what about when their perceived level of attractiveness is not equal to their true value, their true level? And I gave you the example of myself in high school where people saw me as an 8, but I see myself as a 5. And so I asked out 5s and 6s, and of course they're going to, wow, you're asking me out, and I'm an 8, right? But I would never ask out the 10 because I didn't expect the 10 to ever go out with me. And I could have asked out a 10 because 10s will go out with 8 and 9s and 10s. But 10s don't usually get asked out. And so if there's a 5 who thinks they're a 10, they will ask the 10 out. And yeah, everybody sees them as a 5, but they've asked out a 10. 10 doesn't get asked out very often, so the 10 says, sure, let's go out. And then you have the chance to show that you are much more than what you appear to be, right? Because what we appear to be is only a very minimal part of who we are. So if your perceived level of attractiveness is not equal to your true value, you could end up in another direction, right? So what about those with low expectations of success and low self-esteem? Someone who says, I'm a worthless individual. And this happens with women more often than it does with men. The woman says, I'm worthless, I'm not very good. A man comes along and goes, wow, you're worthless. Oh, thank you. Not sarcastically, thank you. You just rewarded me. A reward theory says that when we agree with people, it's a reward. I know it's a horrible thing, but that woman has just had a positive interaction with this person because they agreed that they are worthless. And that makes the first connection. So people usually decide whether to pursue a relationship by weighing the value they see in another person, including such qualities as physical attractiveness, wit, interest, and intelligence, against their expectations of success in the relationship. Will the other person be attracted to me? And this is called the expectancy value theory of attractiveness. So most of us don't waste time on interpersonal causes that we think are lost. As I said before in another lecture, lost causes, we do not go after lost causes. We initiate relationships with the most attractive people we think will probably like us in return. And a person with low self-esteem will pursue people they perceive to be at their lower level of attractiveness, wit, intelligence, etc. And sadly, people with low opinions of themselves tend to establish relationships with people who share their views. That is, with people who devalue them. And this explains why women are attracted to men who beat them or who abuse them in some mental way as well. But why do they stay with that person once they have figured out that this is not a very good relationship? And cognitive dissonance theory gives us a good explanation of this. So cognitive dissonance theory offers a compelling explanation for the mental adjustments that occur in people who voluntarily undergo unpleasant experiences. The theory of cognitive dissonance says that when people voluntarily act in ways that produce discomfort or otherwise clash with their ego and their superego, right, with their attitudes and values, they develop a highly motivating mental state called cognitive dissonance, which is an assumed highly motivating state in which people have a conflicting thought with their voluntary actions. I believe these are my views of the world, my morals, my ethics, and I just did something that breaks the code. The superego says this is the rule and you just broke it. That causes cognitive dissonance. What am I going to do? Am I going to change my behavior or change my thoughts? The superego has rules, right? The ego is trying to moderate between the superego and what you just did, which is opposed to what the superego says you're supposed to be doing. So according to cognitive dissonance theory, people are motivated to avoid this uncomfortable state of dissonance. If they find themselves experiencing cognitive dissonance, they attempt to reduce it in ways that are very predictable, but not very logical. So the two main ways of reducing your dissonance, there's only two ways: change your behavior or change your thoughts. So in general, cognitive dissonance theory says that when people's thoughts or cognitions and actions are in conflict and cause dissonance, they often reduce the conflict by changing their thinking, not their behavior. And why is that? It's because people like to see themselves as being consistent, and inconsistency is we don't want the world to see us as inconsistent. If the world sees us as inconsistent, the world thinks of us badly. We want to be consistent with the world, where the world sees my behavior. It does not see my thoughts. So if I have a behavior the world has seen, I'm not going to change my behavior I'm going to change my thoughts. So to explain their behaviors to themselves, people are motivated to change their attitudes. Otherwise, it would threaten their self-esteem as well. So cognitive dissonance theory also helps us understand certain puzzling social relationships. For example, a woman who is attracted to a man who abuses her. I've just talked about that. Her dissonance might be summed up in this way. Why am I staying with someone who hurts me? That's her thought processes. Her behavior is she's with this person, and the world has seen her with this person. And her powerful drive for self-justification may make her reduce the dissonance by focusing on his good points and minimizing the abuse that he gives me. Oh, he's such a wonderful person. He hits you. Oh, it's just a bruise. He's not breaking any bones or anything. Really? And if she has low self-esteem, she may also tell herself that she deserves his abuse. So to put the matter in more general terms for this particular type of situation, cognitive dissonance theory predicts that people are attracted to those for whom they have agreed to suffer. It's also why when you vote for a politician, and I've used Clinton, I've specifically used Clinton for this purpose because I could use him right here again, right? You say to yourself, I'm a Christian. I do not believe in extramarital affairs. And I voted for Clinton. Clinton's a good guy. And then he has this affair. Oh my God. Everybody knows that you voted for Clinton. And now Clinton has done this thing that's completely opposed to what you believe. But wait, well, it wasn't really extramarital affair, right? It was only, oral sex. It wasn't really, that's not really sex, right? So you change your belief system rather than change your behaviors. And you vote for the person again. You vote for them again. So their vote has given them a powerful motivation to remain faithful through any scandals. Anything other than pure bliss causes cognitive dis. But when we do disagree, we often tend to assassinate the character of the person, and this is called the fundamental attribution error. Social psychologists have found that we tend to attribute other people's actions and misfortunes to their personal traits. Stupid, idiotic, unintelligent, lazy people, rather than to the situational forces that put them in the place that they are. So we see the person on the street and we immediately assume that they're a bum, that they are lazy and unintelligent, instead of looking at the other options that may be because that person is there. So they were a 60-year-old manager at a store, and the recession or this COVID thing has shut down their store. The store is now gone under. They don't have a job anymore. They lose their car because they can't pay for it anymore. They can't now get to any new employment opportunities if there were employment opportunities available for a 60-year-old. 60-year-olds, when you apply for a position, they are not allowed to ask you your birth date. That's against the law. But they can ask you when you graduated from high school, a loophole, because they know 17, 18, 19, you're somewhere in that area when you graduate, so I can figure out from the date you graduated from high school to today how old you are, and so I know how old you are, and people don't want to hire older people. Yes, they have more experience, but they also cost the company more in health insurance. So they'd rather have somebody that doesn't have the experience, that they could teach instead how to do the job, and it doesn't cost as much for that person to own that person. So this helps explain why we often hear attributions of laziness or low intelligence to the poor or the homeless, rather than the externally imposed lacks of opportunity that came to them. It also helps us understand why most commentators in the Kitty Genovese murder attributed the inaction of those bystanders that saw it and did nothing to defects in their character. They just assassinated the character of those people in the newspapers and radio and television in that area, rather than talk about the social influences that cause those people not to behave the way that society expects them to behave. On the other side of this particular attributional coin, we also assassinate the character of people who are successful as well. How many times has somebody been successful? You go, that was just their luck. That was just pure luck, right? So you may ascribe the success of a favorite singer, athlete, or family member to personal traits such as exceptional talent, intense motivation, extreme beauty. Pamela Anderson, the only reason she's a good actress and the only reason she got into movies is because she's got a big chest. That's it. Or intelligence. We talk about, well, that's a person just really intelligent. No, it could be lots and lots of other things that have happened in their life. We tend to ignore the effects of the situational forces like the influence of family or the coaches that they had, the money that was put into marketing blitzes, or a lucky break, right? The lucky break. I like to define luck as the opportunity that meets preparedness. When opportunity meets preparedness, you're lucky. If you are preparing yourselves right now for the opportunities of life at college, you are getting what you need, a degree, so that when you go to a job interview, you have a degree and they will give you a chance because you have put up with so much to get through the schooling to get that degree. You put up with people like me, right? So when you get that job later in life and your friends who do not have college degrees and cannot get that job go, oh, you're just lucky. Yeah. I prepared myself for this opportunity and you didn't. And they're going to look at you and cut you down because you got this job. Anybody could get that job. That's easy. Well, why didn't you get that job? Because you didn't go to college. So opportunity meaning preparedness. That's luck. You are preparing yourselves for the opportunities that come along in life. So college students are preparing themselves for the opportunities of life. And when they graduate and find a job, others will say they are just lucky. Those others have not worked hard to get a diploma and will assassinate the college graduate's character by ignoring and overlooking the work it took for you to prepare for that opportunity. So psychologists call this tendency to emphasize personal traits and ignore situational influences as the fundamental attribution error, the FAE. This fundamental attribution error is not always an error. The bum on the street may be there because they are lazy and may be there because they are stupid, unintelligent. But the fact that we didn't take into consideration any other options of why they're there is the error, is the fundamental attribution error. So the FAE is best thought of as a bias rather than a mistake. However, that fundamental attribution error is an error in the sense that any observer may overlook legitimate situational explanations for the reason why that person's doing what they're doing. I'm standing at a street corner and I'm waiting in Philadelphia or Richmond or one of the big cities. I'm waiting for the stoplight to turn so I can walk across with all the people that are here standing on the side with me. And here comes somebody running across the street against the light. What a stupid idiot. Runs past me and grabs the girl that's running toward the street, that they saw this little girl running toward the street and they stopped her from getting into the street and probably saved her life. But the first thing I think is, what an idiot, crossing the road against the traffic light instead of looking for the situational variables. That's the fundamental attribution error. Do you get that? Okay, I'm seeing lots of yeses. All right. So these attributions can be positive or negative, but prejudice, as social psychologists use the term, is always negative. Prejudice can make an employer discriminate against a woman or a man for a managerial job. There's a management job and a secretarial job, and two people walk through the elevator doors to apply for the jobs, and one man, one woman. The first thing the person sees in HR is, oh, a woman's here for the secretarial position, a man's here for the job as an administrator. And now the woman has a really hard time to get the job that she wanted, the administrator, and the guy has a really hard time getting the job he wanted, the secretary. Nurses, nurses were always female unless they're in the military. nurses were females. Why are you a male trying to be a nurse? You should be trying to be a doctor. It's doctors are males, nurses are females. It's a norm, a social norm that's set up that causes the prejudicial thought process. So it can make a teacher expect poor work from a minority student and a student who doesn't look good. We just talked about that. A student whose beauty level is fairly plain. You're going to think that they're not going to do very well. It has nothing to do with it. And some places in the world, it can still lead to genocide. The Tutsi and the Hutu in Africa hate each other. If one meets the other in the jungle, they're going to try to kill each other. There's a UN army sitting between the Serbs and the Croats to stop them from killing each other. In Europe, Jews and Arabs, when they meet, can be very, very explosive. Right? So genocide, the systematic extermination of groups of people because of their racial or ethnic origins. So prejudice is an attitude. It's a negative attitude towards somebody. The actual behavior that occurs because of the prejudice is considered discrimination. There's the two differences. So prejudice is a negative attitude toward an individual based solely on his or her membership in a particular group. Prejudice may be expressed as negative emotions, that's discrimination, such as fear and dislike of a person, negative attributions or stereotypes that justify the attitude that you have, and or the attempt to avoid these people, to control the people, to dominate the people, or even worse, to try to eliminate the people in that target group. And we have to distinguish prejudice, the attitude, from discrimination. Discrimination is a negative action taken against an individual as a result of his or her group membership. So psychologists want to study what is it that causes prejudice and leads to discrimination. So here are some of the reasons we found that people have prejudices against other people. Dissimilarity and social distance. If similarity, we talked about, similarity breeds some liking with other people, dissimilarity can breed contempt or disdain. If you wear baggy shorts and a nose ring and you meet somebody who's a middle-aged traditional background person, they can be very uncomfortable around you because you're so different from them. And when you perceive someone to be different than you or not like you, then you set them at a social distance. So your in-group is the group of people that you identify with that are like you. And you mentally place people that are different from you at a greater social distance in an out-group, the out-group, those outside of your group that you identify with. And this in itself causes a difference in social distance, and the social distance allows you to see them as inferior and create contempt and create prejudicial feelings toward them. That's dissimilarity and social distance. Economic competition is when somebody's trying to take your job. You're not very happy with them. It creates a prejudicial attitude, and then you stereotype this person is this type, then everybody like them is that type also. So, and if somebody is looking to reduce your value in some way, monetarily, then you have prejudice against that person. So highly competitive situations where one group wins economic benefits or jobs at the other group's expense can easily fan the flames of prejudice. For instance, in the Pacific Northwest, we have old growth forests, and the timber companies want to cut down the old growth forests. That's what they do. Timber companies are in the business of cutting down trees and then making wood out of the trees that we can then use to build things. Well, old growth forests are called old growth, not because they're old and they've been there for a long time, but because the trees in those old growth forests take hundreds of years to grow to their full maturity. The southern pine takes 20 years to grow. You take a 10-acre spot and you plant pine trees there. The next year you plant pine trees, another 10 acres, another 10 acres, another 10 acres for 20 years. At the end of 20 years, you've got a fully grown 10 acres that you can cut down and replant. The next year, you've got the next one that you can cut down and replant, and you just keep on going around and around and around for 20 years at a time. Not with old growth forests. Old growth forests, they take hundreds of years for the wood to grow, for the tree to grow. And that wood is very different than the soft southern pine. The soft southern pine certainly is hard enough to make a building out of. Most buildings in this area are built out of southern pine. But the hard wood in the old growth forests keeps certain animals alive. They can't live on the soft wood. They need the hard wood to grow, to live. And if you cut them down, those creatures will go extinct. And so the environmentalists do not allow the timber workers to cut down the trees. They don't allow them to do their job. It takes away money from them because they're not allowed to cut down the trees. So there's a lot of prejudice between those two groups. And surveys have found, for example, prejudice against Black Americans is the greatest among white Americans who are right just above the poverty level of Black Americans. The average Black American's income and the average white American's income, that is poverty level, that's where you'll find the most prejudice against Black Americans, because they feel if the Black Americans come up, they're going to take their jobs, they're going to remove their income. So economic competition is one of the reasons why we see prejudice toward other people. Scapegoating comes from when a person blames somebody else who has nothing to do with it for their troubles, whatever their troubles are. So in ancient times, the Hebrew priests would do a ritual where they take an unblemished goat, which means it had to be pure white or pure black, and they had to take this goat, they would pray over the goat, and they would bring all the sins of the congregation down onto this goat. They would take the goat out into the desert where it would die, and it removed all the sins from the people. That's the scapegoat. And today, that term is used when a group of people blame an innocent person or an innocent group for one's own troubles. And of course, this happened in Germany during World War II, where the Germans, the Nazis, blamed the Jews for everything that went wrong in Germany. Now, why did things go wrong in Germany? If you've ever seen historical pictures of people in Germany after World War I, they would be walking around with wheelbarrows piled high with money to buy one loaf of bread. That's how bad their economy had gotten. It had crashed. The reason it crashed was because their entire economy was a war economy. They had no economy other than all of their industry was based on war. When they were crushed in World War I and lost, then there was no economy left. There wasn't anything else because the war economy had taken over everything. So it's the government's fault why the economy crashed. But we got to find somebody to blame, and they blamed the Jews. That's scapegoating. Conforming to social norms is really, it's a horrible source of discrimination and prejudice. The source of discrimination and prejudice that is perhaps the most pervasive, and is an unthinking tendency to maintain conditions the way they are. Why are you doing it this way? That's the way we've always done it. Even when those conditions involve unfair assumptions, prejudices, and customs. And I have a story here for you, for this one, to give you a good example of this. A man, a father, and his son. Father and son go out on a fishing trip. Father and son, done with the fishing trip, drive back into the city, have a horrible accident. The father is unconscious, the son is unconscious. They're both at the hospital. They have to have major surgery. And the surgeon walks in to the boy's room, looks at the boy and goes, I cannot work on this patient. This patient is my son. What? How is that possible? Any of you? How is it possible? The father is in the other room, unconscious. He needs surgery too. And his son is right there. And the surgeon comes in and says, I can't do surgery. This is my son. I've got lots of students who say, well, stepson, or, maybe adopted, How is it that this happens? Anybody? Come on, somebody has to have a good idea. Because I just said it 3 slides ago. The mother is the surgeon. People, the mother is the surgeon. But we have such a huge social norm. Oh, doctors are males. They can't be females. For God's sakes, a surgeon that's a woman? How is that possible? Do you understand social norms? Do you see how it affects us? So, for example, in many offices, it's normal for the secretary to be female, executives to be male, and because of this, it may be difficult for a woman to break in the executive ranks. And of course, today, I still hear people that talk to my students that are males trying to be nurses, wondering why they're not trying to be a doctor instead. They want to be a nurse. Let them be a nurse just because they're a male. I mean, I've had many of my students who are working at the hospital here in town who are male nurses, and they have seen me when I go there, and I'm very appreciative of the fact that they wanted to be nurses, and I trained them hopefully well enough, and they were all very good nurses. But it's the social norm is a huge way that we have prejudice in the United States, because as things change, there are people that don't want the change and don't even imagine that the change is possible. So, social norms. Media stereotypes is another horrible one. I remember back in the day when I was first watching TV, remember, TV was invented 10 years before I was born, so it was fairly new when I was a young child. And I remember watching shows with African Americans on the shows, and they were always, in everything I ever watched, they were subservient. They were comical characters that made mistakes, and they were never in charge. And until the Black Power movement gained media attention, Africans and African Americans were most often portrayed in movies and TV as simple, slow, comic characters perpetuating an image that many whites held. Yeah, that's right. That's the way they are. No, it's not. Media distortions still occur today, of course, but they're more subtle than they used to be. Prime time features 3 times as many males as females. If you're watching television, there are more males on the television than there are females. But there are more females in the United States than the females outnumber males in the United States. But you wouldn't be able to tell it from what we see on television. And most people on television are shown as professionals and in managerial positions, but 2/3 of the United States workforce is blue-collar and service jobs, not the managerial positions. And the proportion of non-whites and older people on television is way less than what the actual percentage of them is in the population. And so it appears that the population is this way. And if you have that thought process, that social norm in your head, well, it's confirmed by what you see on television, but it's not reality. It's not reality. So that's media stereotypes. Now, there are ways to break these media stereotypes. And this is something that psychologists study also. During the civil rights struggles in the 1950s and 60s, educators, people like me, expressed a belief that prejudice could be overcome through a gradual process of information campaigns and education. Just tell people that prejudice is wrong, racism is wrong, and it'll be okay. No, it won't. That did not work. Why didn't it work? Because people who are prejudiced or racist, when it comes on television and tells them not to be that, click, click, right? People who smoke, don't smoke, click, click. I'm not going to listen to it. They avoid the information that conflicts with their worldview. So we don't like cognitive dissonance, and that's what it causes, cognitive dissonance. So how can one attack the prejudices of people who do not want to listen to another viewpoint? And research in social psychology suggests there are several possibilities. The new role models is one of them. Tiger Woods. Before Tiger Woods, there was generations of golfers that the people at the top of golf were all white. Now, there were some earlier on, but for generations, it was white, 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 white. And then here comes Tiger Woods, a black man who is getting every single one of the trophies that you can get in golf, proving that if you had this prejudicial social norm that, oh, you can't be black and be a golfer, no, I'm sorry, you're wrong. Here's the proof, right? A new role model. Connie Chung, when she was younger, wanted to be an anchor on a major news broadcast. I'm going to be an anchor. And her mom took her to look at these people, Connie, look at them. Is there a woman anywhere in any of those? And are they? No, they're all white and they're Caucasian. They're not Asian. You're an Asian woman. You're never going to get there. But Connie did not listen to her mother, and Connie kept pushing, 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 and she became the first Asian woman to hold down an anchor on a major newscast. And now people cannot say that anymore. So new role models will keep the prejudice from happening, right? It's more to prevent prejudice than to cure it. But yeah, these people, certainly having these role models encourages people in these groups who might never have considered such a career, or at least it shuts down those people who say, well, you can't ever do that. Oh, yeah, I can. Look at these people. They did it. Right? So they break the norm of behavior and offer an alternative. Then common goals. The Crips and the Bloods hate each other, shoot each other, stab each other. They don't like each other at all. Two groups, the Crips and the Bloods. But if their particular little society has a major issue and they need to work together in order to solve that issue, they will. You can get them to work together on major projects that will help the entire community. And when they do, they tend to learn a little bit about each other. And I'm going to talk about a particular experiment called the Robbers Cave experiment after we get through with this part. It's about common goals and how the psychologists at the time helped to prove that common goals will work. So in such cases, friendship and understandings are fostered, and when the groups are faced with future issues of the same magnitude, they begin to develop an understanding and an acceptance that lasts beyond the solution to the problem. I like to use this example. My sisters, I have 3 younger sisters, and I used to beat them up. I was not allowed to hit. Boys do not hit girls. That was made very clear to me when I was younger. But I had a stuffed animal, and no one said the stuffed animal couldn't hit them, so I was like walking them with the stuffed animal all the time. So, but anybody touches my sisters, I'm going after you. Right? It's me against my sisters, but it's me and my sisters against the world. Common goals. Equal status contact. I remember when I was very young in Washington, D.C., just outside in Virginia, in our community, all of a sudden there was this really, people were talking really meanly about this new family that had moved into town, into the community, because it lowered the value of our homes, because this family was Black Americans, right? That just, I've never understood that, and I still don't today. But for instance, in 5th grade, I developed a brand new friend in 5th grade. And in 5th grade, you know how old I am in 5th grade? I'm 12 years old. And I had this new friend. And I came home and I was like talking about my new friend in school. I made a new friend in school. And something I said, I don't know what it was, something I said, my mom asked me, is he an African American? And I said, what's that? And she said, is his skin the color of chocolate milk instead of white milk? Well, I don't know. I'll have to find out when I go back to school tomorrow. I had no idea that Donald was African American. And he was my best friend from fifth grade all the way through. We graduated high school together. And he was my best friend the entire time. And I didn't care. Who cares? He's my friend. He has the same likes and dislikes to me. He became a medical doctor when I became a psychologist, as we were headed in the same direction. So encouraging news comes from studies of integrated public housing, where there is no loss of income because somebody is coming into your system. That you don't own that house, the city owns that house. So we take surveys of people that are going into public housing and find out what their prejudice level is as they go in, and then later we come back and do another survey after they've been in there for a little while, and they find out that their prejudice level has declined dramatically while they're in public housing. There's no threat of lowered property values, and you find out that these people have the same problems with their children, the same problems with their spouse, the same problems with their boss, the same problems with their cars. You know, they are human beings just like you are, and they have very similar issues that you do, and you have similarities that way. So we find that we develop a more understanding between people in these public housing situations. And the last one is legislation, of course. We have the desegregation laws, and we have laws that abolish racial discrimination, so you can't be discriminatory toward a person on racial basis. You still can on sex. Unfortunately, that hasn't passed yet. But the consequences were sometimes very unhappy during these desegregation. I went to school in first grade during Virginia's desegregation. That's how long ago it was. Not very long ago. There's still people today who lived through desegregation and who teach their children their ways. And some of them were not happy with desegregation, and they teach their children that desegregation is a horrible thing, that we need segregation. And we have found in the last 4 years there's a lot more of them than we thought. So the consequences were sometimes unhappy, even violent, but prejudice and discrimination have gradually diminished, although have not been eliminated. Evidence for this shift comes from polls showing that in the 1940s, fewer than 30% of white Americans favored desegregation, but today it's well above 90% who favor desegregation. And because these changes in public opinion were not part of a carefully controlled experiment where we've manipulated variables, we can't say that the data proves that legislation has caused people's prejudices to diminish. But we can argue that the increased number of white Americans favoring desegregation is exactly what we might predict from cognitive dissonance theory. They have been forced to behave a specific way, which was different than the way they thought, and they don't change their behavior. Well, they can't because it's the law. They can't change their behavior, so they change their thinking instead, softening their prejudicial attitudes. Social influence was at work in Milgram's obedience studies, where subjects obeyed orders to deliver apparently lethal shocks to strangers. That's aggressive behavior. Likewise, the social situation proved aggressive in the Stanford prison study, where ordinary students acting as guards behaved brutally toward the students that were in the role of prisoners. So we do study aggression as well. That was not the purpose of those two experiments, but yeah, we can also study aggression. So how do we define aggression? And every single one of you uses that term, aggression, in your daily life, but there's lots of ways that we can define aggression, and psychologists want to define it in a very specific way. So we commonly use the word aggression to mean assertive or competitive. People who are very competitive In sports, for instance, we say they're aggressive in sports, or assertive, where they're very aggressive people. If they're forward or risk-taking, we say they're aggressive. When the stock market crashed and there were companies where the stock value went to near zero and people started buying up those stocks really fast, and that's forward risk-taking behavior. Very aggressive purchasing is what we call that, aggressive purchasing. And of course, people who are angry and powerful and dominant, we call them aggressive too. But social psychologists define aggression as the intent to do harm to another. But intent is extremely hard to prove. Extremely hard to prove. Intent is something that you have to show that this person meant to do this, to have this happen. If I hurt somebody and I didn't intend to do it, then it was an accident. So why use intent? In the court of law, intent is the very hardest thing to prove in the court of law. It's hard to measure intention. So why don't we just say doing harm to others? Well, because harming someone without intent is not aggression. It's an accident. But intending to do harm, whether that harm was actualized or not, is aggressive thinking. I'm going to punch you. Maybe not. That was an aggressive, the intention to punch you was an aggressive thought. So we define aggression as the intent to do harm, whether it was actualized or not, right? The intent of aggression. Well, there are two major types of aggression that we can define with intent: hostile aggression and instrumental aggression. Hostile aggression is the anger type of aggression. The goal is to injure the person who hurt you or the person who made you angry. Right? Hostile aggression. It's in-your-face aggression, and it's direct aggression. But sometimes I'm really upset with somebody and they could beat me up. Much better at karate, jiu-jitsu, and much bigger with much bigger muscles than me. So I can instead key their car. There's a whole, is it Shania Twain who carved her name into the leather seats of her boyfriend's Jeep, right? It's a great song. I love that song, but my wife hates it. She says, don't carve your name. That's proof that you did it. Carve somebody else's name into the seats. So instrumental aggression. You're not going directly to this person. You are hurting them through something else, either hurting their possessions, or maybe they have a young sister or brother and I can hurt the younger sister or brother. I'm not doing it because I'm angry with that person. I'm doing it because I want to hurt somebody else. That's instrumental aggression also. So it's injuring another as a means to another goal, or injuring something that they own as a means to a goal. So it's indirect aggression, behind your back aggression. And the high school girls are really good at this. High school girls are really good at instrumental aggression. If you don't like somebody in your class and your birthday is coming up, you make sure that everybody has an invitation to your birthday party except for that one person, and you know they're going to find out that they didn't get an invitation, but everybody else did. Whether you like everybody else or not, everybody else is getting their invitation, so that this person feels bad because they didn't get it. Indirect aggression, right? So there's two theoretical perspectives on aggression. They are both Freud and Lorenz, Freud and Lorenz, and they are very similar to each other. So the first one is Freud's psychodynamic perspective, and he says we all possess an innate drive for sex and aggression. The two are inescapable. They're built into us. And society functions to inhibit the direct expression of these urges. So we have to seek out socially acceptable means to express them. Sex, for instance, creativity and the arts. We can do things to get rid of our sexual tensions. The aggression tensions, we can do sports. We can go out and box, right? I was a boxer in college because my cousin Mike Rossman was the lightweight champion of the world boxer. And so I was really into boxing at that time because of Mike. But I can get out aggression tendencies through competition in sports. We can also do them vicariously as well. But the hydraulic model says that we have this aggressive tendency and sexual tendencies, and they build up in us like water behind a dam. And you don't want the water to actually get above the dam and go over. It'll crush the dam. So there are ways to release the tension, and that's called catharsis. Aggressive tendencies build up over time and have to be released. That's catharsis. And we can achieve this catharsis vicariously. We don't have to do it ourselves. We can watch violence on TV. We can do violence on video games, right? We can watch a sporting event, and we get out our aggressive tendencies by watching those. Now, this does not work with sex. You cannot get out your sexual tendencies by watching sex. And I'm sorry, it works with aggression. It does not work with sex. Aggression from Lorenz's perspective is very similar. He says aggression is innate, built into us, just like Freud. It's necessary, just like Freud, and adaptive. And that's where he's different from Freud. Adaptive means it helped our ancestors. And so that's why today we have aggression, because our ancestors lived because of their aggression. And I've already talked about Cain and Abel. Abel was killed by Cain. His passive tendencies were not enough to keep him alive. Cain killed Abel. Abel had no children. Cain did have children, and his aggressive tendencies were passed down through his children, down through the generations to us. So genes for aggression are passed along, whereas genes for passivity are not. And situational or environmental cues interact with genetic predispositions, and then we get aroused through hormones going off. There's a situational cue in our environment, and that means it's hardwired, not learned, and we are then aggressive. So what are the roots of prejudice, aggression, violence, and terrorism, and how do we combat them? We've already seen a little bit. We've seen evidence that a leader, an antisocial leader, can sway a group to behave in a manner that's inconsistent with the norm. We've seen that intolerance can be averted through greater understanding. We've seen the power of the situation can help us understand violence and terrorism. And experiments have been performed to create prejudicial, violent, combative behaviors within groups or between people. And we reviewed one of those experiments, the Stanford Prison Experiment. Other experiments have gone one step further in the attempt to better understand the roots of social conflict and how to end the prejudice and the discrimination once it's been started. So they never took the guards and the prisoners and tried to get them back together again to be friends, to stop the behavior. But there are some researchers who have done this. And I like the Robbers Cave experiment. That's my favorite of all of these. The setting was a Boy Scout camp known as the Robbers Cave, and there the experimenters, Musafir Sharif and his colleagues, randomly assigned 11 and 12-year-old boys to two groups. They were dubbed the Eagles and the Rattlers. And the experiment called for conditions similar to those in any Boy Scout camp, summer camp for boys, days filled with competition, games, and activities. And the experimenters hoped that the competition would create conflict between the two groups. But they didn't leave it at that. They purposely made a conflict between the two groups. So initially, the Eagles and the Rattlers were kept apart so that they could get camaraderie within that particular group. So they knew what group they were. They had very good group cohesiveness, solidarity, loyalty, and the sense of group membership. And then later, the experimenters brought them together, the two groups, to have competitions like tug of war and football. And there were prizes. The prizes for the winners. If you're a loser, you're a loser. You don't get nothing. They don't get prizes for participation, right? You are the winner, you get prizes. You are the loser, you get nothing. Right? So the final straw was that they held a party. And at the party, they had cake and cookies and brownies and fudge and all kinds of candies. And they also had cauliflower and broccoli and carrots and, vegetables. Well, they told the eagles that it started at 7 o'clock. And they told the rattlers it started at 8 o'clock. So the rattlers are off doing something else. The eagles get to this camp and, here's all this candy cake and cookies. And so they ate all the sweets. When the rattlers got there, there's nothing left over except the vegetables. And, well, you can't really do anything with a head of cabbage except throw it at somebody. And that's exactly what happened. So they had a big ruckus and name calling, and they had a food fight. They had a giant food fight. And now, yes, the rattlers hate the eagles, definitely, and the eagles do not like the rattlers for sure. So in this rancorous atmosphere that's been established, Sharif and his colleagues tried now various tactics for promoting cooperation between the groups. How can we get these two groups to like each other now instead of hating each other, and have no more prejudicial attitudes toward each other and no more discriminatory activity toward each other? And they tried lots of different things. And what did help was to reduce the tension was to find things that they had to do together to serve their own self-interests. Now, these boys were driven to this camp, and it took over a day to drive them to this camp in the middle of nowhere. And then the cars left. And so the boys know they're in the middle of nowhere, and there are no cell phones in those days, right? And there's no way to get back to civilization very easily. Now, the cars are just around the other side of the mountain. They don't know that they're safe, right? They are safe, but they don't know this. So the experimenters called a halt to all the competition games and assembled the boys together and said, there's a problem that's developed with the camp's water supply. Now, you cannot live without water. This is a very dangerous situation. We can't get back to civilization or get help. We need to find the problem and fix it. So the rattlers and the eagles have to work together to try to solve this problem. And both groups agreed to search for the line trouble spot, and they did this together, and they did it harmoniously, and they fixed the problem. And then they had another problem that occurs, and then they had another problem that occurs where they had to work together. To serve its own needs, each group had to cooperate with the enemy. And as dissonance theory would predict, hostility changed to friendliness because they had to change their behavior with each other, and that led to a change in attitude. And the attitude change resulted from the need to justify the altered behavior. So it took several such crises to break down the hostility barriers between the two groups and to build a sense of mutual interdependence, a working relationship based on shared goals. And in the end, when they went back to civilization, the groups actively sought opportunities to mingle with each other, and friendships developed between each of the eagles and the rattlers. And when they got back to civilization, the eagles pooled their money and bought candy and sweets for the rattlers, which is pro-social behavior. They changed their behavior from antisocial behavior to pro-social behavior. So what is pro-social behavior? Well, it's a commentary on our society. We have names for massive negative events. We have crises, catastrophe, calamity, devastation, all kinds of names for things that happen that are horrible. But we only have one word for a massive positive event, and that's a miracle. That's the only word we have for a massive positive event. But psychologists do define positive behavior, although very few actually study it, and it is called pro-social behavior, positive behavior. Any action intended to benefit another person or group. Positive, constructive, and helpful behavior. It's the opposite of the antisocial behaviors and behaviors that are carried out with the goal of helping other people. And I'm sure you can pick out all kinds of things that you have done or things that people have done for you that were pro-social. Parents help you out to live through your childhood. You weren't killed by your parents. They did everything they could to get you to the point you are at right now. So there's one special type of pro-social behavior where the animal, including human beings, does not consider its own safety, puts itself at risk, and that's called altruism. So altruism is a type of pro-social behavior. It is defined as any action intended solely to benefit another and thus not to gain external or internal rewards. It is unselfish, positive regard for the welfare of other people. It is pro-social behavior as a person carries out without considering his or her own safety or interests. And probably two really good examples of this are Sister Teresa, who just recently passed away, and the Dalai Lama, who have given up everything in their lives to help other people. Okay. So we usually call people who perform these types of feats heroes or heroines. Although when asked, a hero will usually say they did not think about the action that they performed, and it was probably a stupid thing to do. So the definition of a hero or a heroine or a heroic act might be this. 1, it was done on the spur of the moment. 2, without thinking about it. 3, placing the individual in great peril. And 4, in which the person miraculously, there's that positive, miraculously survives. It's not a very complimentary definition for a hero or a heroine, right? But who wants heroin anyway? No, just kidding. So in evolutionary biology, altruism is used to define the behavior of the animals that risk their lives for the family or the group unit. So a person who sees a fire and there's a child in the building rushing in to get to the child against their better judgment, if they had thought about it, grabs the child, survives, and then they're considered a hero. Not a fireman. That's what they're paid to do. They're paid to go in and do this, or they're trained to do this, right? And that is a pro-social act rather than an altruistic act. But the doing something on the spur of the moment without thinking about it is more the altruistic act for human beings. But we don't give our animal friends the idea of cognition that they think this, so they go and help somebody. So in evolutionary biology, an organism is said to behave altruistically when its behavior benefits other organisms at a cost to itself. This cost to itself is usually measured in what's called reproductive fitness. In other words, they lose the opportunity to be good mothers or fathers to their babies, or even to have any babies, because they've been killed, so they can't have babies, or they've been hurt, so they can't be a good mother or father. So by behaving altruistically, an organism reduces the number of offspring it is likely to produce itself, but boosts the number that other organisms are likely to produce in their genus, species. So there are some animals that they're on television. They stand up and they look around, their little hands up. Can't remember the names. Meerkats. Yes, meerkats. Thank you. So these meerkats, they live in a community, and the parents look up and around at everything, watching for any kind of a predator that might come. And when they do see a predator, they make a noise and they jump down into their burrows. Well, we have the same type of thing in the United States, except they're not in colonies in one burrow. They're in colonies in many, many different burrows. And I can't remember the name of them either. Prairie dogs. So these prairie dogs, they stand up and they look around also. There are lots of dens. And they see a wolf. They make a noise. And all of the other prairie dogs jump into their dens to hide from this wolf. The wolf is now attracted to the one who made the noise, who's also diving into his den. Now, he could have dived into his den and protected himself, and then the wolf might have killed many, many of the other prairie dogs, right, because they weren't warned. But at his expense, he has jumped into his den, and that wolf is going after him. He may get hurt. He may get killed. But he has protected the whole colony, and he may get away as well. But he has the possibility of reduced fitness, reduced reproductive fitness, because he warned everybody. That's altruistic behavior, altruistic behavior. So this biological notion of altruism is not identical to the everyday concept, because in everyday speech, in everyday parlance, an action would only be called altruistic if it was done with conscious intention of helping another. But in the biological sense, there's no requirement for conscious attention to it. We don't give our friends in the animal kingdom conscious algorithmic thinking. So instead, these animals are born to make these noises. Vervet monkeys give an alarm call that warns the fellow members of the tribe if there is the presence of a predator. But they have two different sounds they make. One is for a predator on the ground, and if they make that noise, all the vervet monkeys go up the trees. They have another one for like an eagle or some other bird of prey, and if they make that noise, they all come down the tree. Now you can record those sounds. You can take them to any vervet monkey colony anywhere in the world and play these sounds and get the monkeys to go up the tree, down the tree, up the tree, down the tree, up the tree, down the tree. They respond to this sound innately. It's just built in, and it doesn't matter where you go. It's not that this vervet monkey group talked to this vervet monkey group and taught them their language. That's just the way they are. They go up a tree when they hear this sound. They go down the tree when they hear a different sound. So in insect colonies, ants, wasps, bees, termites, all of the workers are sterile. They don't have the ability to give any new reproductive advantage to the colony. They don't have children. The eggs are produced by the queen in that, and that's the only one that produces the children. But every single one of them will give their life to improving the colony. So they construct and they protect the nest, forage for food, and tend the young, and such behavior is maximally altruistic. Sterile workers obviously do not leave any offspring of their own, so they have a personal fitness of 0, and their actions greatly assist the reproductive advantage and efforts of their entire species. And that's the end of our lectures. We end the study of social psychology and the study of psychology, general psychology, on a positive note, at least here. And I hope that all of you will do something pro-social or altruistic for your own species, because God knows we need to do it. Y'all have a great weekend and do well on your tests. We do not have another class. We're over. We're done with. And I hope that you stay healthy. And I will see you around campus, hopefully, one day. Stop and say hello to me if you see me. Bye.